So went into law school with that kind of focus in mind of how can I help musicians make music their only source of income, rather than having to wait tables and take second and third jobs to make ends meet. How can you as an artist make your living doing music? So that's sort of my focus of my individual practice. What are the ways that you can protect yourself and make money doing music?
Hey everybody, Resident Loser Jeremy here, and we have another video with Brenden. There is a lot to talk about with this guy, and I feel like I could pick his brain forever. If you missed the first one, check out the link in the description, otherwise this one might not make a whole lot of sense. I had wanted to get Brenden on the show for a while, and this was the perfect time because he has created some templates of contracts and estimate papers that are specifically for use for people like producers, recording studio owners. You can go to his website and check that out. The link is in the description. And if you want to purchase those, you can use the discount code RECSTUDIOLOSER. I don't get any kind of kickback for this. I personally use these documents. I love them. My clients appreciate having them. They are a wonderful set of contracts and studio rules that just keep me protected, and it's good peace of mind that I'm operating like I should in the bounds of the law. So in this one, we kind of go down some weird rabbit holes of questions that really just deal with us in the music industry as a whole. So let's get talking to Brenden. Is there anything you do want to make sure that we hit?
I think the only thing that I would say as a blanket statement is if you're not understanding what I'm saying or what's in a document or a situation and you're confused, you should always reach out, always ask deeper questions, always feel like you're empowered to dig a little bit more and find the answer that you're looking for. If you don't understand it yet, keep asking questions. Make sure you understand it. And that's true whether it's a concept that I'm talking about in one of these videos, if it's a document, if someone has asked you a question about your document that you don't understand or know the answer to, don't make it up. Ask someone. That making things up is probably the worst possible way to handle a situation like that, because you're almost certain to get yourself into trouble.
You just made your own intro. Good job.
I know. It's one of those things though, like I have a real interest in like helping people understand things. So if you're not understanding it, don't just sit there and nod your head like you get it. Please, like, email me, send me a message, get a hold of the contact info on my website. I want to know because that's important to me, and it should be important to you too.
So let's start by explain a little bit about yourself, not just like, your law background, how you got into it, why you decided to do that, and then maybe even your musical background, and then some of your hobbies, like you're sure. Basically Superman. So of course we know each other from going to college together, undergrad. I was in music since I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, singing at church, and then started to take piano lessons, elementary, middle, and high school, and college as well. Really decided when I went to college that I wanted to major in music business. And so that's sort of where I pointed myself, and didn't really find a good niche in college, although I spent a lot of time learning by doing rather than sitting in a classroom, right? So what that meant was I got really terrible grades. I was a very poor student, barely made it out after 4.5 years. Not my proudest moment, but learned a lot along the way. Was in a metal band for a while. We did some touring and things, and had a good time with that. Was in chorale, sort of classical side of things. I did opera, musical theater. Not a stellar musician by any means, but I can pass okay. So after undergrad, working in the hotel industry, doing live sound, and it was okay, but it really wasn't for me, not for a career. It was not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and had given thought to law school. But again, law school admissions don't appreciate a GPA below a 3. So I had a lot of extra work to do in order to get into law school. I had to prove that I had grown up a little bit. So I took the LSAT, which is a miserable exam, probably second only to the bar exam. And I took the LSAT 3 times. In fact, the year I got into law school, I had sort of decided if I don't get in this time,
I'm just not going to do it. I've given it everything I can. If that's not good enough this time around, then I'll think of something else. So fortunately, I got into law school with the intention of practicing in the music and entertainment space. I saw some friends go through some pretty terrible circumstances with contracts and record labels and getting screwed over on rights with their PRO and other things. And of course, working together with you, we learned a lot about some of the sort of hidden aspects of the music industry and ways to make money and things to think about as an artist and as a producer and as a recording studio owner. How are you able to maximize your time and your energy in a legal way that maybe some other people wouldn't think about? So went into law school with that kind of focus in mind of how can I help musicians make music their only source of income, rather than having to wait tables and take second and third jobs to make ends meet. How can you as an artist make your living doing music? So that's sort of my focus of my individual practice. What are the ways that you can protect yourself and make money doing music? So spent 3 years in law school, focused on intellectual property and sports and entertainment, which is kind of the blanket term that people use for music and entertainment law. Graduated in 2018, took the bar exam. Fortunately, passed it the first time, so I didn't have to do that again. That is a 2-day exam that is, it's just mentally and physically, believe it or not, it's really tough.
And that means a lot coming from you. You're an Iron Man, like a legit Iron Man.
Yeah. So I did probably not the smartest thing, but my first year of law school, 2015 to 2016, I also trained to run an Ironman triathlon, which is a 140.6 mile race, 2.4 miles of swimming, 112 miles of biking, and 26.2 miles or a full marathon of running consecutively, right? So you take each individual sport and stack it on top of the next. So about 14 and a half hour day doing that in Boulder, Colorado. Fell in love with the state while we were out here. And in fact, we live in Denver now. So we're very happy to call the Centennial State home. And then decided I would do it again in 2018 to celebrate the end of law school. So another full Ironman, and I've got some adventures coming up this year and next that are hopefully at least as challenging, if not maybe a little bit more. We'll see.
A couple of those challenges are all yet to arrive.
Yes, we're expecting identical twin girls, simultaneously excited and terrified.
Totally natural feeling. So, man, I wanted to get you on here because you have such a unique perspective and background in a lot of these things, because you have a musical background as well as a law background in this context. So it's really interesting to kind of pick your brain in some of these situations. And I know I've called you personally with a lot of weird questions when I was just like, what is happening? What do I do? How do I present myself? How do I talk to these people? And you've helped me a ton. And one thing I've really realized is I've never had to act on anything legally ever. But one thing I've learned from you is preparing and just planning, because and we can talk about this and how important like having a good contract is. And I think for the people who watch my channel, those involved with working with any other musician or other producers or anybody in that capacity, having some sort of formal agreement is huge, and a handshake can go so far.
Yeah, so I think the important thing to know, right, is that a verbal agreement is still enforceable, but it's a whole lot harder. You have to be able to prove like what was said, what was agreed upon, and more than that, what was the intent of the agreement, right? So we could say something is kind of gray and ambiguous in terms of the specifics. And you could think that we intended to agree to one thing, and I could think that we agreed and intended to agree to something totally different. That's hard to do, right? Especially when you start thinking about consent to record. Some states are single-party consent, meaning you can press record on your phone and make a voice memo without asking the other party and them agreeing to it. But other states are two-party consent states, meaning both parties have to agree to push record and memorialize the agreement in that way. That doesn't really exist in a written contract. So I always would say, get it in writing, put it on paper. It's a whole lot harder to go back on that. The other thing to remember is that sometimes contracts can be scary. A lot of times when you hand someone a piece of paper and say, before you come into my studio, I need you to sign this. That starts to put people off a little bit, right? There's a little bit of, well, okay, this is a whole lot more serious than I intended. Maybe I ought to take a step back and maybe someone else won't require this of me. Although it's scary, there's a way to explain it that is beneficial to both of you. The thing that a contract does and that it really gets toward is that it sets up the relationship in advance, right? You agree, how are we going to do this before anything goes wrong, before you set foot in my studio, before you start loading in gear and banging up the walls and maybe I break a drum head or who knows what, right? We get that out on paper and we say, here's your responsibility, artist coming into the studio. This is what you're going to do. These are your responsibilities. And at the same time, here's what I'm going to be doing for you. Here are my responsibilities. Here are the things I'm responsible for. If I screw up, here are the ways that I'm going to make it right. If you screw up, here are the ways that you're going to make it right. And it sets that playing field when emotions are level, right? The worst thing to do is to wait until emotions are high and something has already happened to try and set the ground rules for how things are going to get fixed or to fix the relationship. That's never a good time to do that. That should be done beforehand. And that's what a contract does.
Can you describe... I mean, that was really good synopsis of all of that. But I guess if you had to bring it down to like one sentence of what a contract is that even possible? Or like if I had to describe it really, really quickly to somebody, like, no, here's the reason we need this. Boom.
Yeah, it does two things in particular. It sets the ground rules for how we're going to act and how we're going to do things together, and it sets the boundary, right? So it lays the base work and then it builds the walls of the house. That's the best way I can describe it. It puts down the foundation. These are the ground rules. This is the basis of how we're going to work together. And then it puts up the walls and says nothing goes outside of these walls, or nothing outside comes in from outside of these walls. And it protects everybody involved. So although it's not really one sentence, you could find a way, I'm sure, with a little bit of practice to get it down. But that's really what it does. It sets the ground rules and builds the boundaries of the relationship.
Are there situations where somebody would be skeptical? Like if I had an agreement for artists coming in or whoever to come in, would there be like reasonable skepticism from their standpoint as to contracts written for one party to benefit?
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of times what you'll see, especially in the music industry, we're pretty bad about this usually, is that an agreement is written to benefit the party that wrote it. It's very one-sided. It tends to be very punitive against the other side. Nobody takes the time to really negotiate those. And that's where I saw a lot of my friends getting into trouble, is they would sign record contracts that were almost explicitly designed to be punitive against the artist signing it and favor the label. I hate that. I hate that that's how contracts are designed, and I don't write contracts like that. My contracts are always focused on what's the relationship here and how do we benefit both parties, right? Start from a fair place. Start from a place that gives equal credence to both sides, and you won't find yourself in a huge argument usually.
I guess switching gears from contracts now, there have been a lot of questions about copyright, trademark, all this stuff. And I've even called you in situations where artists have either started recording and wanted to stop, or they don't want to come into the studio until all this stuff is worked out with copyrights, trademarks. And then not even to mention the whole like poor man's copyright, especially in the music industry. That seems to exist everywhere. I had somebody in here talking about it a few days ago. I guess, could you speak to that? What are some of the myths and misunderstandings? What's even realistically necessary?
Yeah, so I think first of all, what we commonly see is sort of confusion between copyright and trademark. So what's the difference, right? Most people don't quite grasp that. a copyright exists at the moment you have created and fixed something in a tangible medium of expression. And that's statutory language drafted by Congress, very sort of uptight and stodgy, right? If you're writing lyrics to a song, as soon as you write those lyrics down, copyright exists. That you don't have to do anything else. Copyright exists at the moment of fixation. That's it. It's done. Trademark requires a little bit more work, and trademark behaves a little bit differently from copyright. Trademark is an indication of source, right? So Apple is a trademark. iPod is a trademarked term. Now the software that's within that phone is copyrighted, most likely. It might be patented, but that sort of gets into some semantics that none of us are really going to care that deeply about here. But the long and short of it is, most of the time musicians don't need a trademark. You might consider trademarking your band name once you reach a certain level of success to indicate, hey, the shirt that I'm wearing, it comes from a particular source. Generally speaking, that's not super necessary for an artist or a band. What is a copyright. You hit on the poor man's copyright. In the year 2021, I don't think that's really a thing anymore, frankly. Especially when we think about how music is recorded now. There's so much metadata. Now, the thing to remember is that with a song or a musical work, there are two different copyrights that exist. There's the musical work, which is sort of the structure of the song, right? If you made a chart for a song, that's the musical work. And that is copyrightable separately from the audio recording. The audio work is its own separate copyrightable thing. And in many cases, there's going to be a third copyright, especially if you've written lyrics down. That is a separately copyrightable piece as well.
I think the one we're most familiar with in what we do would be like the sound, the SR form, the sound recording copyright, which if I'm not mistaken, that's literally just a recording on essentially like the waveform. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a little bit more than that. It's hard to say exactly where that stops. That's sort of one of those things that's being argued about. But yeah, you're going to be most familiar with the sound recording. Although I know you as a producer will often chart songs out. So you do work in the musical work side as well. So all of those things are separately copyrightable, and all of those copyrights exist at the moment of fixation, right? So as soon as you are recording to your drives in the studio, that's when the copyright exists. So if people are waiting to come to the studio until they've copyrighted the song, that's not, I mean, I suppose it's possible if you recorded a scratch track and copyrighted that, but putting it on a disc and certified mailing it to yourself is totally not necessary. If you've recorded it on your phone, you've got metadata there too. You can see the date, the time, generally maybe even the location, depending on how you have your settings in your phone. The name, all of these things sort of exist automatically that tell you when you've created the copyright. Now, to get certain remedies at law, if somebody copies you later, or you think that there's been access and copying of your work at some point, having a registration through the Copyright Office is going to be beneficial to you. It entitles you to a certain level of damages and other fees. But generally speaking, a copyright that exists at the moment of fixation is good enough for most people.
I guess one of the things about creation and copyright just happening, is there something to... I've even had people who are leery of me taking their songs and wanting to copyright before they ever come to me, which I can sort of understand, but there's also... Is there something to the paper trail of emailing back and forth, phone calls back and forth, you're hiring me for a service... Yes, all these files are on my hard drive. They've been created, they've been copyrighted, but the rest of this implies I'm a work for hire, and this is all your material.
Yeah, so that's a good question. There is something to the fact that you're providing a service where you don't really own the material that's being recorded, right? You own the equipment. And certainly you have an impact on how that gets done, and you should be compensated for that. But in terms of ownership of the underlying copyrights, you're not the creator. That starts to get arguable the more you take an active role as a producer. And if you think you're going to run into issues later where someone has accused you of stealing a copyright, although that's kind of hard, unless you're doing something with that work, then it's kind of difficult for an artist to get upset with you. So if it's ever a concern, don't do anything with it. But yeah, there is, I can understand the confusion and the concern, again, especially as you start taking more of an active role as a producer. You do start contributing to that creative process. And so you do have some interest in that. And if an artist is concerned about that, then absolutely they should discuss with you, putting it in writing, that any work that you contribute is work for hire, and that your compensation as a producer comes on the front end and is not accessible in any future royalties. Now, you can always negotiate that, right? You can get a certain percentage of royalties on the back end, and all of that should be captured in contract. And everybody needs to keep accurate records. So if you're assigning producer points to someone, or if you've agreed to pay certain royalties to your producer or studio owner or whoever, you need to make sure you're keeping an accurate accounting of that and paying those out. Otherwise, you could end up in some serious trouble. The other thing to remember is that most of the time, and my agreements do this, those kinds of agreements contain an audit provision. And if you don't have good enough records to tell what's happening, if and when someone decides to audit those records, you're going to have a long fight on your hands. And that's not the way you want to spend your time, I promise you.
There's so many aspects of this that you just don't even think about. I mean, we tend to want to just make music, sit behind a desk, mix, or create music, but these other things that your cat?
Yeah. Olive, can you please? Yeah, I know. Hey, stop playing in that. We've got clothes hanging up on a rack in the hallway, and she's walking through them and swatting at things.
So this may be a good point to transition to the fact that you have kind of created something that could be really helpful for a lot of people in a position like mine, a studio owner, or I guess it could be in a commercial space, or maybe even possibly in a home space, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I did create a template, and a lot of it really flows from what we've worked on together. Sort of the lessons that we learn as we use agreements and we change things and we form them differently. But what I've created is a template for a recording studio owner, whatever level you are, right? If you're doing a home studio or maybe you've got your own building, or maybe you're traveling to different studios and you need to have an agreement in place between you and the recording artist. And again, I recommend this because it sets the rules for the relationship. It tells us how we're going to handle ourselves in the studio, wherever that is. So it contains some basic protections for both the studio owner and the artist. I've also included a quoting template, right? So if you're not using PayPal or QuickBooks or some other form of software that creates a quote for you, then there is a template for you to use. There's also language where if you are using PayPal to create invoices and do quotes and you're accepting payment that way, I've given you some language in the template to put into your PayPal invoices that is just as effective as if you were doing it on paper. And really, it's there to protect both the artist and the studio owner from sort of the things that might be concerning. Now, for you in particular, I actually have drafted a separate agreement, actually, to allow people to come and stay at the studio. And that's either on the lounge side, or even if they're bringing an RV, maybe a band has a bus that they want to park outside and connect to the RV hookups in your building there. So if that's something interesting that you need, as you're watching the videos here, get a hold of me on my website, and we can come up with a template for that as well. Yeah, I think it's a good starting point, right? It's not going to fit everybody's needs straight away. It will fit a lot of people's needs without a whole lot of customization. And that's the point, right? I want people to be forming contractual relationships on a more frequent basis because it protects everybody. So the template has been drafted in a way that's fair to both sides and is very easy to use. It includes a document that sort of gives you instructions or some basic guidance on things you might consider editing. For example, I think the template uses Colorado law, just because I'm here in Colorado, and so that's where I want any disputes to focus out of. But for you, it's Indiana. Someone who lives in New Jersey might want to use a New Jersey governing law and venue. But all of that is covered in the document. I think it's pretty easy to read, drafted using what we call in the legal profession plain English. It doesn't have a lot of legalese, heretofore and thereafter, all that kind of stuff. I've tried to leave out as much as I can.
The stuff that tends to scare away musicians.
Yeah, that's right. Now, there are certain words that we have to use, right? We have to use the word shall and therefore sometimes. It just there is legal meaning behind those words, and so we have to use them sometimes. But where we can, I like to use plain English that everybody can read and understand. And I had a little bit of fun in the Readme document as well. Just trying to make it light and comfortable, right? You should feel comfortable reading it, and that, like, at the end of the day, you have a document that you can use and be protected with. And
that was one thing I really appreciated with it, was that you included that Readme document that made, if there was a question over here, go to the Readme document, and you explain it really well. And sometimes you explain it very conversationally, which was very good.
I appreciate that, man. It's one of those things I really pride myself on. I think to make the law inaccessible doesn't serve anyone well. Part of my goal with those documents is to make the law more accessible. Now, what it isn't, it's not legal advice, and it is not creating a relationship between the person buying that template and myself. I'm not yet your attorney. We have to go through an engagement letter process, and we can get into all of that. I'm happy to take you on, but just know I'm not your attorney just by buying the document. I'm not your attorney just by watching this video. This is not legal advice. If you have questions about your particular situation, please let me know on my website or contact an attorney near you. It doesn't have to be me, right? I think these templates are easily adjusted by any attorney anywhere in the country. So if you buy it and you're like, yeah, I don't want that weirdo with the ponytail and the big earrings touching my agreement again. I want this other guy in a suit and tie. Give it to the guy in the suit and tie or the gal in the pantsuit. I don't care. Just use it.
And that is something like it's a little bit of an investment, but for people in our situation where stuff could go wrong and stuff could go wrong quickly, just being prepared is a crazy peace of mind. And I don't think it's out of the question. Like, what you're offering is $200 for the agreement. But for those of you watching the video, if you go to his website, and there's going to be a link in the description, you can go to the shop, look up, what did you call it? The recording studio agreement? What was it called?
Yeah, it's a recording services agreement. And the coupon code for recording studio loser subscribers will get you $50 off. So it's $150 for the template. I think that's a pretty good deal. The code is Rec Studio Loser, all one word.
REC Studio Loser, one word, get 25% off. And it's something they can reuse every time, right? Yep.
And it's, I think one of the important things to know is that even if you have an artist coming back, you'll have to use it again. It expires at the end of that engagement. So you'll get multiple uses out of it. And I hope that rings true, right? That you feel comfortable with the document, you're able to edit it, and you can keep printing it and using it once you've got it sort of tailored to your needs.
And did you include studio rules on that as well?
Yes, the studio rules are attached to the quote template. If you have rules in your studio, like you're not allowed to have alcohol, no smoking, you break it, you buy it. That kind of stuff is all included in the studio rules and is binding. And again, I've created different ways for you to use it. If you're using an online invoicing system, then you attach it a little bit differently. If you're using the quoting system that I've provided, then you can just print it out. And of course, all of this is fully editable. You can change any of it. If your studio allows smoking indoors, perfectly fine. Delete that, portion of the language. And that's all covered in the Readme document.
So if they do have questions, if they decided to go down this route and they want to spend $200 or $150 with the coupon code, could they ask you questions? Like, how accessible are you?
Yeah, so generally my billable rate, a little bit high for things like that, especially where I'm the one who's created the template. I should be able to address this pretty quickly. So on my website in the pricing section, you'll see I've created sort of a package for people who have bought templates from my website who need a little bit of customization work. And the way that I've done it is it's up to 2 hours for, I think, $200. And that includes a phone conversation between the two of us to figure out, okay, what is it you're concerned about? What's the special circumstance that you need addressed? And then the time for me to go ahead and draft it and send it to you. And then we'll talk about it afterwards too, to make sure that you understand what's changed, that you can explain it appropriately to those artists who are coming to you for your services. And that you're comfortable with what the document says and does now. I think one thing to mention is a good contract, in my mind, never makes its way to court. I'm not a litigator. I don't intend to be in front of a jury or a judge. I'm a transactional attorney, right? So documents and buying and selling and those kinds of things are my bread and butter. So I won't be representing you in court. That's not something that I do. But a well-written, well thought out contract that the parties can discuss and explain between one another should never wind up in a courtroom. And that's my goal. I don't want to see these in court. I don't want a case being brought over a contract that I've written. That's problematic to me. So that's my goal with these is to keep both of you out of court. And this is a good way to do that.
And then just to speak to your kind of experience in contracts and stuff, I mean, I know you can't go into details and you probably don't want to, but you've written or been a part of some very high level, extraordinarily high value agreements. Am I right?
Yeah. So my day job, I'm corporate counsel, corporate and compliance counsel at a company here in Colorado. And we have, my day job is redlining and negotiating with some of the biggest transportation companies in the world to basically purchase some software from us. So I deal every day in contracts. I write different varying kinds of agreements. I've seen some disputes come up and we learn from those things. And all of that learning goes into what I write for anybody. Yeah, some of the biggest names in transportation in the world, people who deliver your packages to you, who you might call up as a ride sharing service on your phone. I've done agreements with all of them. Fortunately, we haven't had a whole lot of litigation arise out of those. And I work with a team, right? It's not just me, but I'm very familiar with long, critical documents that form the basis of relationships that are worth millions of dollars and last for years. So I do have a little bit of experience in creating documents that are worth something.
And again, if you guys are interested in getting those, the link will be in the description. Check out his website. If you have questions, I assume they can just fill out that contact form and ask you. If he absolutely gets flooded, which there's been a lot of you asking questions about this, give some patience here. I'm sure he actually has a day job, but he will get to you when he can. If it is something you're interested in, I use these contracts. I love them. Clients appreciate them. Take that to heart.
That's it's good to hear that clients appreciate them, because that's always sort of the question for me, right? Is like, yeah, I'm helping the studio owner by giving you a document to use, but to know that the clients appreciate that, it's a level of professionalism that you might not get everywhere. That's really good to hear. So I'm glad.
Absolutely. And there definitely is something to be said about when you approach a client and you're organized on your side and having a contract that is written in a way that they can understand just kind of puts their mind at ease, like knowing they can see what you're doing. So they're not worried about you being crooked, I suppose, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's important to, if a client asks you a question and you can't answer it, don't be afraid to tell them that they can take that contract to their own attorney. They might not have an attorney ready to do that, and that's perfectly fine. But that also will show, like, I'm not afraid of what the document says. Like, there's nothing in here that you need to be concerned about because I'm comfortable with it. And if you want to have somebody else review it, you should.
Well, man, I feel like it's a steal to just be set up for basically as long as the foreseeable future could attain as a studio owner, somebody working with professionals in the music industry.
It's one of those things, the law will change every so often. We live in what's called a common law system. Unless you live in Louisiana, you weirdos live in what's known as a civil law system. But I will keep up to date. And if you have a question, like you said, get on my website, use the contact form. And who knows, maybe we'll even get enough questions to do another video together.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks for being on the video. I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody else does too.
Awesome. Use the template and let me know how I can improve.